We're live now.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon again, everyone. This is Senate Government Operations on Tuesday, January 9th. We are back, and we are going to start with a conversation about the newly introduced and revamped legislative compensation bill. First, I'm going to start with just a little overview and then turn it over to Tim Devlin, our attorney, to walk us through the bill. And Tim also has a summary on the website. So both the bill is introduced and Mr. Devlin's bill summary is on the website, as is, I believe, the JFO. It's not yet on the website.
But it's in our hands, which is very handy.
Yes, it is there now. Scott Moore from JFO, his fiscal note, so we'll go get a walkthrough from that as well.
Ooh.
So just to review with everyone where we're at and why we have a new bill. So last year, this committee took a long time working on a legislative compensation bill, S39. And that bill was then amended by our Appropriations Committee and passed on the Senate floor and passed in the House. And then it was vetoed by the governor, and we are not able to override that veto. So we are starting again with a new bill that is a more modest approach and has a different structure for the pay. And this I worked on with many of you and many of our colleagues in the off session to try to get to a bill that would satisfy some of the concerns that I heard from our colleagues. The main difference between this year's bill and last year's bill, and I know this is of concern to people, but to some people around this table, but the main difference is it does not provide health benefits to legislators. That was the most expensive piece of the bill from last year, and so that, in an attempt to make the bill more modest, came out of the bill. It also creates a 3-tiered structure for the compensation, for the pay for legislators, which is tied directly and is now in statute directly tied to the average Vermont salary, or the mean salary for Vermonters, as reported by the Department of Labor. So when you see the fiscal note, and I won't steal too much of Scott's thunder, but when you see this fiscal note, you'll note that it is tied to the 2022 average salary, and then the math is done from there. It's a 3-tiered structure that's based on for both sort of regular members, and then chairs and leaders, and then the pro tem and the speaker. So we'll have more details about that when Scott testifies, but we tried to reach what we hope is more of a compromise while also resetting the legislative compensation. It hasn't been done in over 20 years, and it is time to take a look at it to make the job both more sustainable for members, but also more accessible to other people who might be considering running for the legislature, and so that it's not a barrier to being able to serve in public office based on your financial situation. And during the off session, I was invited by the National Conference of State Legislatures, who was here today, providing training to us to be on a panel with a legislator in another state who was actually the majority leader in Kansas. And they passed a legislative pay bill last session, and they have the sort of exact opposite makeup that we do. They have a supermajority Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, and they were able to pass a legislative pay bill. So it was really interesting to talk with him as the other member of the panel, and about why they were doing it, which was very similar to the reasons we are doing it, but also how they were able to do it. And that's why he suggested tying it directly to something that's external. So that's why this is directly tied to this external thing. and it's not inflated. So as the salary of Vermonters goes up or down, our salary would potentially go up or down for the average salary. So we would we would get, we would get paid what the average Vermont salary is based on the average Vermont salary. So that,
which we have to point out was the original intent of the reset in 2004.
right, but it
didn't make it
lagged
into
because
statute.
it was, yeah, it didn't get into statute and it's lagged. So anyway, I just wanted to provide that sort of off-session context for the bill and why I think it's really important. And as I said multiple times last session, I think it's also really important and really striking that, you know, some of the leaders in this effort are female legislators, and certainly the data bear out that women have a harder time asking for pay raises and getting pay raises and being paid equitably. So I think it's really important that we, as female legislators, advocate for other legislators and other legislators who may follow us, in fact.
Here.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who has worked hard on a summary, and let you walk us through the bill, and then we'll hear from Scott, and then we'll maybe have a little discussion. We have time on Thursday for more discussion, but I also don't want to hold people up if the weather's starting to get really bad. So Tim, take it away. Thank you
for having me, Chair Hardy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Chair Hardy, would you prefer that I kind of work through the summary, or really word for line by line walkthrough, or maybe bounce between the two?
Well, I'm going to defer to my committee because I know the bill pretty well. So what would you prefer, the actual bill or the summary of the bill?
I've looked over the bill already and I would prefer the summary, but.
Okay. Are you okay with that? Mm-hmm. Summary? Okay.
Okay.
Summary, it is.
Great. So you have before you draft 1.6. It still has the draft request number on it, but has been recently rebranded as S224, relating to compensation and benefits for members of the Vermont General Assembly. This has, the summary has 5 parts, as is the bill, but I'll just start with some of the mile high review of just the purpose that this bill will accomplish. That is 8 points, just right at the top there in the summary. First, this bill will enable legislators to participate in flexible spending account program offered to state employees for healthcare and dependent care expenses, but does not, as already was indicated, cover health insurance and state plans. Second, this will peg legislators' compensations to the mean Vermont wage. Third, this will provide annual compensation to the Speaker and Pro Tem, the chairs of standing committees in the House and Senate, and the majority and minority leaders, and that is that 3-tier system that Chair Hardy referred to earlier. The fourth item it'll do is provide legislators compensation for up to 20 days of work during adjournment. The fifth item is allowing legislators to choose whether to receive their payments for meals and lodging expenses as an allowance, which may be treated as income subject to tax for federal and state income purposes, or alternatively as reimbursement of actual expenses, which may be excluded from income for federal and state income tax purposes. Mileage is staying unchanged. The sixth item is that this bill will provide a stipend for members-elect to attend orientation programs. Seventh, this will expand the legislative leave of absence law to allow members to take a leave of absence from any job, not only from a full-time job, in order to serve in the General Assembly. And eighth and final, this bill will create a temporary legislative service working group to consider and make recommendations on issues involving legislative compensation and benefits, staffing, administrative support, length of the legislative session, and equalizing the number of members per legislative district in each house. So, starting at the first part of the bill, which has to do with flex spending and employee assistance programs, I'll just reiterate this. There's not much more to it in the summary. This will amend, this only pertains to Section 1, which will amend 3 VSA, Section 361, and will enable legislators to access any employee assistance program offered to state employees and any flexible spending account program offered to state employees for healthcare or dependent care expenses, or both. And again, this would not be eligible. This this would not enable legislators to be eligible for state health insurance plans. Pause there.
That was in S39 too, that provision, and it's a very small program.
Part 2 of the bill pertains to compensation and expenses. This includes sections 2 and 3. Section 2 will amend Title 32 VSA Section 1051, adjusting the title of that first to read to read Speaker of the House and President Pro Temp of the Senate, semicolon, chairs of standing committees of the House and Senate, semicolon, majority and minority leaders, semicolon, compensation and expense reimbursement. This section will have essentially in 3 subparts, speaking to that tiered leveling before. Subsection A pertains to Speaker and Pro Temp. Subsection B pertains to chairs and majority and minority leaders, and subsection C gets to the limitations of essentially preventing stacking, so that various legislatures can't double up. So subsection A will modify compensation for the Speaker of the House and President Pro Tempore of the Senate. Annual compensation is changed from a fixed sum to 30% of the Vermont wage. The regular session compensation is changed from a weekly rate to 1/52 of 130% of the mean Vermont wage. Special session compensation is added and will be equal to a 1/5 portion of the regular session weekly adjusted compensation for each day of the special session. That's essentially just carrying on that same rate, but just per day. And then additional compensation during adjournment, and this will look familiar as it's replicated for each of those tiers. This section is added and will be 1/5 of the regular session weekly compensation for up to 20 days of additional work during in the legislature's official capacity. And just to pause on this for a moment, that official capacity would include work, including attending meetings requested by other state officials, professional development, their community meetings, and providing assistance or services to a constituent of the district. Importantly, but not for activities conducted for the purpose of influencing election, advocating a position on a public question, supporting or opposing one or more candidates, or organizing a political party. Essentially, political activity in general.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really want to underscore this section because this was a piece that we heard from folks saying it would give a potential advantage to incumbents who might be using something as a legislative event, but really it's a campaign event. And so I appreciate the clarity on the language. And I just want to ask, did it come from like the secretary? Is there another way that we frame up political activities that you're duplicating in this language, or was this an organic new piece of language? I'm just wondering, like, if they have a different definition of what like a political activity is than the Secretary of State, or like how we do our. That's just the general question. I don't know where.
Great question. I based this language off of Title 17 campaign finance.
Great.
And what does it look like?
Wow, perfect.
I just told Tim what I wanted, and he came up with the magic. Senator Watson.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we can get into it when we, get into the bill, but for that, when I think about the compensation for committee work that has happened over the summer, it doesn't matter how long the meeting is, you get compensated for that day. Is that true in this case, or like if you, I'm thinking about, like you're attending a community meeting, like happens in the evening. Does that count as a day, or do we need to stack like 8 hours worth of meetings?
You have to be a lawyer and take it 15 minutes at a time.
We can discuss how to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not specified.
Okay, half day,
Is
yeah.
that
No, I really think when
Yeah.
I first did this bill many, many years ago, we did it based on the way lawyers charge for their time, which is every
Oh.
15 minutes. We could do it every half hour, but
that
it's
seems really complicated. So
It's actually not.
we will
And
discuss it and
It's
figure out how
okay.
to do that.
Thanks.
It's not specified at the moment.
May I ask you a question
Yeah.
on this section? So I'm a little concerned about this language, because I agree with Becca, it's helpful to have this clarified. However, it says it requires that the meeting be called for attending meetings requested by other state officials. I might actually be part of requesting a meeting. I don't think it's fair for your intent.
So we can
Anyway,
have
we
this
will discuss it, but I just
conversation
wanna
about the
flag
details.
that
Right now,
because-
I want to hear the summary so that we can get through this.
Yeah, we'll just
But yeah,
flag it.
yeah.
Yeah, you might call me, yeah.
Or the three of us.
Go ahead, Tim.
So, subsection B, modifies compensation for chairs of standing committees and minority leaders. And the framework will seem familiar now because they will have annual compensation, regular session compensation, special session compensation, and additional compensation during adjournment. Annual compensation is added and will be 10% of the mean Vermont wage. Regular session compensation is also added and will be a weekly salary equal to 1/52 of 110% of the mean Vermont wage. Special session compensation is added and will be equivalent to 1/5 portion of the regular session weekly adjusted compensation for each day of special session.
Wait, can I stop you there?
Yes.
Because the way you're saying it, I just want to clarify for people who maybe, is you're saying it's added. So these types of
Yes.
compensation are not new types of compensation. They're added in the draft to clarify
Yes.
what they are. So legislators already get regular session compensation, special session compensation. Those are not new. And the speaker and pro tem already get the annual compensation. What is added is annual compensation for the chairs and leaders. But it's not all additive, so.
Yes, when I say added, I am referring to new statutory sections in
Yes,
language
okay,
here, the
thank
thing
you.
with the underline under there.
Yeah, okay, that's important to understand.
Subsection C limits who can receive what compensation and essentially prevents stacking, as I coined it. The Speaker of the House and President Pro Tem of the Senate cannot be compensated for their role as Speaker or Pro Tem and a committee chair or majority/minority leader. Likewise, a legislator may only be compensated as a chair of a standing committee or as majority/minority leader, not both. Okay. Section 3 amends Title 32 VSA Section 1052, modifying compensation for representatives and senators. Subsection A addresses compensation during regular session, special sessions, and adjournments. Regular session compensation is changed from that weekly fixed rate to 1/52 of the mean Vermont wage. Now at the top of page 3 of the summary, special session compensation is added and will be 1/5 portion of the regular session weekly adjusted compensation for each day of the special session. And similarly, again, additional compensation during adjournment is 1/5 of the regular session weekly compensation for up to 20 additional days before. And same conditions apply to what those 20 days will be. Subsection B addresses expenses. Mileage is unchanged. Meals are altered so that legislators may opt to either receive a meals allowance or reimbursement of actual meal expenses. The allowance is the default. Meals allowance is unchanged. Meals reimbursement is the option that's added here to this new language. And legislators who opt in, they receive reimbursement for actual expenses capped at per diem rate set by the federal rates. Lodging is altered in the same way, so that they either opt into the allowance or reimbursement of actual expenses, and the allowance again is the default. Lodging allowance is unchanged, lodging reimbursement is added into language. Then absence accommodations are inserted into this bill as well. If a legislator is absent for reasons other than sickness or legislative business for one or more entire days while in session, the legislator shall not receive or be reimbursed for mileage, meals, or lodging expenses incurred during the period of the absence, except that lodging expenses associated with a lease or rental agreement may be received or reimbursed upon approval of either the speaker or pro tem. I'll pause there for a moment.
So this is similar or maybe even the same as what was in S39, and just want to be clear, especially to people who may be listening. This is not, you don't get both the reimbursement and the allowance, you get one or the other, and you have to choose once a session and tell legislative operations which one you're choosing. And the absence, if there were instances where people were stuck in leases, so to speak. You might remember during COVID when we shut down, people had leases they couldn't get out of and were required to pay for those leases, but weren't allowed to be reimbursed. And so this is sort of saying that if there are special circumstances and the speaker or the pro tem approves it, you could be reimbursed for lodging expenses that you're not able to get out of if there are special circumstances, like a pandemic.
Or a flood.
Or a flood, or something like that, so that it is, there were people who were on the hook for thousands of dollars and they were kind of stuck with it.
Well, they weren't found and we did help them.
I think eventually, but I don't know. But this would just make it clear that they could be helped, but it would be approval of leadership.
Not the e-board.
No, the speaker or the pro tem.
Subsection C creates an orientation stipend for members elect, and that will be 1/5 portion of the regular session weekly adjusted compensation for each day of attendance at an orientation program for new legislators organized by the General Assembly and its staff.
This also was in S39, and this was to that point where we want people to come to orientation, but they often have to take time off from work and are not compensated for it. And so this was to allow them to get a stipend for the days during orientation before they become legislators. So that piece was spelled out.
Part 3 of the bill is just one section, section 4, and that has to do with legislative leave for employment. Section 4 amends Title 21 VSA Section 496, legislative leave, so that a person leaving any position, no longer just a full-time position, to serve as a legislator shall be entitled to a temporary or partial leave of absence. The employee would now provide notice within 14 days of being elected, rather than was currently under statute, within 10 days after filing to run the primary or general election.
And you'll recall that was also language that was in S39, and we got some pretty compelling testimony from a House member who had a specific situation where she lost her job. So this is unchanged from S39.
Part 4 contains just one section as well. This is section 5. This is to do with the Legislative Service Working Group. And this part of the summary is a little bit longer, hard to summarize exactly what it is. I just pretty much verbatim copy what it is from the bill into here. I'll just start by reading it aloud if that's okay. Section 5 creates a legislative service working group that will consider and make recommendations on issues involving legislative compensation and benefits, staffing, administrative support, the length of the legislative session, and the number of members in each house, and number of members per district, including, and we have some sub-bullets 1 through 6, the current compensation and benefits offered to legislators, including A, whether current salaries and benefits, including those added or increased by this act, are sufficient, and if not, how they should be increased. B, the impact of current salaries and benefits, including those added and increased by this act, on recruiting and retaining members from diverse backgrounds and life experiences. C, an implementation plan and proposed budget to members eligible for state health plans. And D, whether members should be offered additional benefits, including reimbursement of health, child, dependent, and elder care expenses. Number 2, the committee will also consider whether changes to staffing are necessary, such as increasing the number of legislative staff in existing staff offices, expanding the type of legislative staff services available to members, adding caucus staff, and adding personal staff, or providing members with an allowance to hire their staff. 3, how to increase the administrative support available to members to increase their effectiveness and ability to respond efficiently to the needs of their constituents. 4, whether changes should be made to the length or structure of the legislative session. 5, whether the number of members in each house should be decreased to offset increases in compensation, benefits, and staffing. 6, final subpart, whether the number of members for each representative district should be the same, and whether the number of members for each senatorial district should be the same for the purpose of equalizing the number of constituents per representative in each house in order to better balance the constituent services obligations and workloads of members.
Yes.
I'll
Same.
pause there.
So a lot of this is similar to what was in S39. There were some things that were removed, but this is obviously all up for conversation as to whether we want this working group or not and what we want them to do. But this was, based on the changes in the bill and what we had last session. But really trying to get at workload and also get at support.
And that leaves just the last part, effective dates. This bill will go into effect on January 1st, 2025, with the exception of the study committee, which will go into effect upon passage.
Okay, so that is the bill. Are there any questions for Tim? Senator White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a JFO question, but I want to ask before. The 1/5 of a week versus the fact that we're only here Tuesday through Friday. I'm just like, does it, when you say 1/5 of a week of our, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Is it,
That's what we've done in some committees. Catherine Bennett from the Joint Fiscal Office. In some committees, like House Appropriations, actually meets 5 days a week.
oh, okay, so it's based off of, okay.
It's been a standard practice. You're right. It's a little, but there are, and some committee, you all at the end of the session come in 5 days a week. So we treat it as a weekly.
Okay,
It has been sort of standard practice.
okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments at the moment? Okay, we'll obviously come back to having Tim talk
Good
with us
work.
about
Thank you for
it.
the summary,
Good work,
Tim.
Ruth.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I will happily represent this
All
bill.
right. So we're gonna have Scott come up, Scott Moore, thanks Tim.
If you'll have.
This is a very exciting moment for Scott and me.
Senator Clarkson and I have gone way back, past couple of years.
I love the fact that you are presenting in this community. Thank
So
you.
this is also on our website. There's one page.
And it actually just really,
Oh, yeah, I can get one to.
To Sarah, if you don't want it, then. Sarah's probably already read it because it was on our website.
for the record, Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. Senator Clarkson and I have worked together in the past couple of years when I was the committee assistant for Senate Economic Development. So it's good to see you in a different group.
It is a total joy to watch you grow and flourish in this building.
So, Madam Chair, just in interest of timing,
Yeah, so if you could just,
we can give you the really big highlights. I can go through each section for the different costs, or we can just jump to the table at the back, which is
I think since we just had a section by section, it might be better to just go to the table and
Sure.
explain the tables. You have 2 tables,
We have 2 tables.
so
Oh, right.
that would be helpful to look at both of them. And then if you have questions about how it links to what's in the bill, we can do that.
So for the very high overview, if we turn to table 1, which is on page 3, we can basically see the estimated new costs from this proposal based upon current law. So the current law, what you're getting paid today versus what you would be getting paid underneath the auspices of this particular bill. So section 1, we had talked about EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. Essentially, that'll be about $6,000. And then for reference, I did include aspects from S39, so you can see, as Madam Chair mentioned earlier, the difference would be cheaper with this versus S39's bill from last year. So S39, the EAP would be included, so therefore that would still be that $5,940 number that you see there. Section 2 with the Speaker Pro Tem, the chairs. Under current law, as Tim was mentioning, the majority minority leaders don't have an annual stipend. So under current law, that column, $115,000, would not have any annual stipend for them. And then underneath the proposal, once we look at the number of chairs, as well as the 5 different majority and minority leaders, that would be a total cost of $1.2 million. And then S39, that cost has been $145,000. And we look at the legislator compensation. Currently, under current law, that's $3 million and change. And underneath this proposal, that would be $4.4 million total. And then in S39, that would have been the $6.5 million. So, and again, here, section 6, we talk about the legislative working group. The estimate would be about $10,000 cost for any legislative working group. So you can see the subtotal for those costs for compensation, 3.2 roughly currently under the proposal 5.7, and then S39 would have been 6.7. For estimating mileage, meals, and lodging, because of the fact that we don't know what currently you're going to actually submit for mileage and everything under today's law, we use the same estimate across the 3 different categories. So if you're interested in knowing exactly how many meals and miles are estimated, I'm happy to share that information with you.
Then,
Yeah, go ahead.
I assume you got that from like legislative.
Yeah, we
So
looked at-
it was just based off like what you did last, what you could estimate from last.
Yeah, we did an average for the past couple of sessions, excuse over 2020 because of the nature of 2020.
Yeah, that was
And
exactly.
looking at 2019 and 2022. Average miles, average meals, and average nights.
Wasn't actually, bless you, 2019 and 2023?
2019 and 2020, that's correct, yes.
Yeah,
2022
22 was still a
some,
pumpkin year.
Oh,
the
So
first
you're only
half.
here half the time.
Nick, on meals, can you just tell us why our meals haven't gone up?
Why you know the stipend hasn't?
Yeah,
gone?
maybe I should just ask Mike that.
That'd be probably a microphone question.
Okay, I'll ask Mike.
I can tell you what the cost is.
I mean, it's just funny that everything else has increased with inflation and CPI or whatever we do it by, whatever the federal government does it by.
I think it'd be a good source for that, especially even this morning, he sent me a new updated mileage rate. So this actually is reflective of the current mileage rate as of December.
Okay,
So
I was
I
disappointed.
had to change the fiscal note last minute again.
Senator White.
is there any potential decrease you considered with, okay, here, so there is a way of earning a greater income as a senator or representative by staying over more nights than not staying over, for example, or taking your meals and doing the meal and to get those benefits to supplement the fact that we don't have a very high income.
Stipend versus the reimbursement. This is
Yeah, or there, I think, I'm trying to be very diplomatic about the way I'm putting this, but did you factor in any potential decrease in people maybe not staying over as many nights or potentially not taking the meals as frequently or anything like that, knowing that we currently see a trend of people maybe using that to supplement the fact that they don't have a.
Can I just say, they don't earn any more, they don't supplement if they actually are using the full allowance.
Yes,
I just want to say that there's.
Yeah,
I get-
to be careful how you're talking about it, but
Yeah, that's, I'm
so I
trying to be
think
very
that there's
delicate.
a conversation about if you take the stipend, there it's taxable income.
Mhm.
If you do the reimbursement, it's non-taxable income. The bill would provide the option of doing it, but if you do the reimbursement, you have to provide some kind of documentation or attest to the amounts that you're putting in. And that, Scott and I talked about whether or not that would maybe decrease the cost.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Because it would be based on actual expenses. And I think there probably will be, but without the experience of knowing what's gonna happen, I think, I'm not gonna speak for you, Scott, but I think you erred on that side of caution in your estimate.
Yeah, I guess I've just seen people will live in very bad living conditions for less money than the cost of the stipends. Or not bad living environments, but let's say cramped living environments or lower quality housing to be able to make up the difference because the stipend is more than maybe the monthly rent, for example. And it just seems like that could be factored in for actually seeing a decrease in the amount. But that's just, I just want to put that out there.
To answer your question, this line item does not factor in any sort of potential decrease because we don't know what that potential decrease might possibly be. So from the aspect of being fiscally conservative and making sure that we actually have the more conservative number, we went with not trying to implement any sort of decrease based upon not having the experience of what may or may not happen.
So this is a very conservative estimate, and
Unless-
we could potentially see it being lower in reality.
Correct.
That's interesting. Thank you.
And then if we look at the next line underneath that, the estimated healthcare costs, this is really the biggest difference between the S39.
Go ahead. No, my question is about this, so I'm gonna let you finish.
So this $1.9 million number is calculated based upon the current rates that we have for FY24 based on healthcare costs and we see for paying that. So that's, you're not going to see that in this particular proposal, but I wanted to show it here. As Madam Chair had mentioned, the big decrease would be because of the roughly $2 million that would have been from healthcare.
Right.
So my question is about that estimate, and if I recall from last year, there was sort of a low, middle, and high estimate. Which one is used here? Is that the sort of low end, the high end, the mid range?
The high end.
Okay, and
So my apologies. It is increased from last year because the rates have increased. But what this does, basically, it looks at a range. So we have 180 members of the body and 90 potentially underneath this plan, 45 underneath this plan, 45 underneath this plan. So it's a blended rate, really, but it is higher than it was before. So,
but it does assume that every member is going to buy into the plan.
correct, it does have all 180.
Which we never ended up doing a survey to find out how many people actually would take advantage of a healthcare. So that is a little bit of an unknown because we never actually did that survey, which we
It would
were
be
hoping to do.
interesting too, to just see sort of like across employers, like I would imagine that there's no employer out there where 100% of the employees take the healthcare plan, whether that's because they have a spouse with a better plan or because they are, have access to Medicare or, so it's, my sort of assumption with that number is it is actually higher than what it would actually be.
And so I'm happy to go look and find the actual numbers for how many members we had budgeted at which of the 3 different plans. To get back to you, I don't have off the top of my head.
That would be really
So just to give
helpful.
you that idea.
That would be helpful. And I do think it's worth just sort of like, and I don't know if the data exists on like sort of like looking at employers and like what is the average percentage of uptake.
Well, actually, what would still be great is if we could quickly survey
Yes.
the body, 180 people, which is not that hard,
This is
and find out who has health insurance, who doesn't, and who'd be interested in taking advantage of this.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's something that the off-session study committee could
Could do,
potentially
yeah.
do, but we are not doing that this session. We don't have time.
we will do this pretty good.
I mean, yeah, not to get started on healthcare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Let's move on to the next table.
Sure. If you look at the next table, last page, page 4, these are the dollar amounts with all of the language Tim had mentioned. So we can see that right now the Speaker and the Pro Tem, in the current law, they have a compensation, an annual compensation of $14,433. If this bill was enacted, we tie it to the Vermont mean wage. The Vermont annual mean wage number that we're using right now is $59,190. So 30% of the annual mean wage is $17,757.
So sorry, Scott, what is it again, 59,000?
59190.
And while we're on that figure, would you be kind enough to describe the difference between mean and average? Because there is a difference.
Median.
Are they? I thought there was a difference.
Mean and median, there's a difference.
Ah, okay, the median,
Yeah, so median is basically the midpoint, so.
got it, and the average is average. So
So,
mean is averaged.
And that's what we did last.
Okay, great, good, I knew there was a difference between something.
so the next line item, we can see that the speaker and pro tem, their weekly compensation is currently $934. 1/52nd portion of 130% of the annual median Vermont wage works out to be $14.80. And then daily, Senator White, for your question earlier, I divided it by 5.
Yeah,
Everybody gets 5 days.
yeah, I was thinking about that, I was like, but we don't work every Monday.
We're working like dogs that Monday,
I know,
we're
but-
uncompensated for it.
Correct.
We are compensated and this, the fiscal year, JFO, sorry, sorry, Catherine.
Just saying, 1 out of 5 days, right, exactly.
Well, yes,
But nobody thinks, yeah, you're right.
yes, but not everyone submits for Monday, I get what you're saying.
You don't get to submit your
Yeah, like,
expenses.
but if you have an appropriations meeting, you get compensated for that day.
Okay,
You know-
we're gonna carry on without more conversation as Scott goes through the table so we can get done.
Okay,
So their daily compensation with currently $187, underneath this proposal, $296. Currently for the off session compensation, which is that maximum of 20 days, which is in the bill. Right now, there is no provision under current law. Underneath this proposal, again, it would be the daily rate, which would be $296 for the speaker and the pro tem. In the same vein, the next little group is about the chairs. And scroll down so I can get down on my screen. The chairs currently could have an annual compensation up to 10 days of their daily stipend, or $16.87. Underneath this would be 1/10 of the annual mean Vermont wage. So 1/10 of that 5,119 is 1/10 of 59,190. Then the weekly standing committee for a chair, currently $843. And then 1/52nd portion of 110%, works out to be $12.52. Then divide that by 5, and we can get to the $169 number. Underneath this new bill, $251. The maximum of 20-day compensation for off session currently is not part of the current law, so therefore that's a 0 on that spot. But then again, it would be $251, which is the same as the daily compensation. The next groupage, the majority minority leaders, right now on the current law, they have no annual compensation.
we get a parking place.
It's a parking place.
So I think actually, oh, I see, okay. The one thing I would note is this 1687. And you and I had discussed this and I see that it didn't get changed, but this is this is not actually annual compensation. This is the potential for being reimbursed for
Right.
10 days of salary.
Yeah.
And
been
so
more
that's
clear.
more equivalent to the 20-day thing
Right.
than to an annual. It's not an automatic thing. And many of us didn't even know about it until just recently.
Just think how much money we've saved all these years.
And for the purposes of the majority minority leaders, I did include 5 for House and Senate, as well as Republican, Democrat, and everybody.
Oh, yes.
When I did the calculations, I put in a factor of 5 for that.
Did you?
That way.
So independents don't have a caucus leader or director? Have we, is there anything to be said that, I know that they sometimes do group together as independents though. and they, right, like I feel like there is,
In-house, they can.
okay. Just wanna make sure that if there is a fourth example person who might need to be,
I think the very definition of being independent means you don't group together with other people.
I'm just always looking out for my independence, you know? They do sometimes come together on stuff, so having an independent for the independence.
All right, carry on.
So that's basically section 2. Do we have any questions about that? I think I got all the lines as we went through them all. The notes on the right-hand side, you can see the language is carried over. Moving to section 3 of the bill, which talks about regular members of the body. The current compensation weekly is $843. And then underneath this proposal, it would be $1,138. And again, that's 1/52nd portion of the annual Vermont minimum wage. So take 59190 divided by 52. For those of you that like to do math. Then we have the member session compensation daily, which is the 843 divided by 5, or the 1138 divided by 5. And again, the off session compensation for a maximum of 20 days. Would be 1/5 would be good compensation for each day.
Okay.
The member elect stipend, the very last thing, we did build in for new members being able to go to orientation and then be paid at the same rate as the other members for the other way.
Great, all right, are there any questions on the table for Scott?
No, good work.
It basically boils down to about $2.5 million more than current.
Senator White?
Did you do anything with the percentages of like what this would be of the budget in total? Like what percentage any of these increases would in
Of the legislative.
of the
budget.
legislative budget, or comparing it even to the staff costs of, let's say, the administrative branch, and like what percentage? I feel like we had a conversation last year that included folks saying that this was a very large amount. Like when you hear $4 million, you think it's a large amount, but when you actually compare it to the cost of staffing in other places, like let's say the administration or the judiciary, it was a very small fraction of that. And I feel like we had some information. I'll have to look back, but I'd love to do that again, or to
Yeah.
see that information again.
Perspective.
Of like what percentage of this is the legislative budget comparing us to the other two branches.
And maybe comparing the legislative budget, we're supposed to be 3 equal branches of
Yes.
government. Where's the equity?
Yeah, I think we had that last year, so I'll look, but it would be great to have it for this bill as well.
I think it would be.
Senator Kowski?
I do think the equity of branches is important, and I do actually have a bill on the wall that would get at that, aligning other branches with the same thing that we are doing.
Senator
Forward to
Watson?
that day.
Senator Norris, did you have a question? Catherine, did you want to?
I have one thing, Scott, do you want to talk about the range a little bit? Yeah.
So underneath current law, it would be $2.5 million. And then if we build into potential inflation factors, which I'm trying to get at an inflationary rate, then we're looking at between 2.5 and 3 million if this is enacted for FY25.
And if it were enacted and it's FY25, it would be based on the 2023 annual
Living
wage. So there's always gonna be a delay on the wage because of the availability of data. And that 2023 mean wage has not yet been published, right?
April is what I'm.
April. So that's when the Department of Labor publishes the previous year's wage table.
Yeah, and they're kind enough to share with me that typically they work on it and it gets published around April, they said. So they were kind enough to
Oh,
share that.
advanced copy, nice.
We're gonna have to change the poem, because April's not gonna be the cruelest month anymore. It may be a joyful one.
Catherine.
Yes, if I might, in the legislative budget, it was, I think about 20, the legislative budget was $21 million.
Okay.
22.5.
Okay, so this is about 10, just to give you a sense, like in the 10% range. For the legislature, you're absolutely right, the executive branch is
Very
bigger. They also have, you have different roles, so, you know, there's a reason they have a lot more employees, et
Oh,
cetera, et cetera.
exactly, yes.
But that gives you some sense of that. And the other thing about the inflationary rate is the budget's also currently tied to, you know, there's pay act. So that's why he gave you a range, because if this becomes law for 25, we would spend some more time, and the contract's not resolved yet for the state employees, that kind of thing, what the constitutional officers will get. So that's why there's a little bit of a range there for the 25, but it gives you a sense about where it will end up.
Yeah, but
All right, are there other questions? Yeah. Scott, did you have anything else?
Just one of the thoughts I had as I was going through quickly, and just Kowalski's note for a question about the healthcare costs. Let's say you have just a minute if you bear with me. I could tell you what that number was.
I'm gonna tell you what, from last year, I looked at Dan's fiscal note. Did you see that email I sent? Yeah.
And last year, we had used the estimate that if half of the legislators, so 90, needed to get healthcare. And I'm just confirming that we did in fact do that again this year, so only 90 members. And we did 35 at the cheapest plan, 30 at the medium plan, and 25 at the highest plan.
Okay. That's a fair range. I think that's probably reflective of, could still be less, I think 90, but go ahead.
Okay, so we are gonna, have a committee discussion on Thursday a little bit and, come back to this on Thursday. And, tomorrow we're gonna get back to flood recovery, and, the constitutional amendment. So thank you both very much, and we will certainly see you again as things evolve.